Let's talk about a Twitter poll, particularly a poll about Twitter. You might think this isn't really something that matters to you, but I hope that we will be able to have a meaningful conversation about the world around us and how we can pursue that which is good and help to snatch our world from the jaws of hell which are ever taking their bite. So Dave Rubin put out this poll that said, if Twitter was blown up today and we all had to find new ways to communicate, would the world be worse off, better off, or the same? Now, by a whopping victory, 82.9% of people agreed we would be better off. Now, I want us to talk about this from the perspective of the biblical worldview and examine the psychology of this. I want us to talk about natural law, about how Twitter has become this unworthy headship, which is really the head of the snake that is our modern public sphere, and that's a serious problem. But at the same time, simply taking it away does not instantly make people good. So I do have my thoughts on this. I always think one should take their moral stand, and personally, I do think we would be better off. I know a lot of times I take the contrarian viewpoint about all sorts of things in the world. I do think the respondents to this poll, which there were 12,000 of, think that we're better off. I agree with that. However, I want to begin with some contrarian viewpoints because I heard some people that I know and respect say that they actually believe we'll be worse off. And I want us to talk about that. We'll weave the biblical worldview through all of this, so let's have a great time. Thank you for joining me. I'm Pastor J. Dylan Proctor. So one of the reasons that I heard people say that we would be better off is Twitter allows us to see people for who they really are. And now that actually is a really good thing. I'm not one who likes to wallow around in the swamp. I like to see the enemy head on. And even if I'm terribly outmatched for whoever it is I'm coming to contend with, I like to see things head on. I'm not the one who likes to play the cloak and dagger game. I like to see things for they are. And Twitter does, by and large, allow us to do that as a people. It really does. And even though a lot of us are not on Twitter, because again, myself, I'm not even on Twitter. I don't really understand it. I'm not someone who communicates well with just a few words. Anyone who knows me, I'm long-winded in personal speech, and I'm also long-winded as a preacher. But those who are on Twitter, the few voices that are on there, which are not held accountable by the natural law of the world, they do control a lot of the public discourse. And if you're listening to this, chances are you're not on Twitter either. However, you probably hear a lot about it, and the decisions, the culture that is found on that social media site do influence the public sphere around us. They have far larger impact on things which are done in our culture than they should. And the argument that says we would be worse off are the people who say we like to see our enemies where they are and to know what they're thinking. And they also say Twitter allows us to, rally energy behind a cause really quick to put out communication really, really fast. And these things are true. And you might think those are benefits, but when we go back to Scripture, we can look somewhere like Genesis 11, and I just talked about this last week, coincidentally, with the Tower of Babel. It's not a good thing that people can conspire together at a global level. The social media companies really allow for a new Tower of Babel, and that's a bad thing. People are naturally wicked, people are naturally tyrants. And we see Twitter is something which is a unmerciful ruler. It's extraordinarily unjust in how it allows speech on there. You're just blatantly bearing false witness if you would think that Twitter is a platform that's equal and open to all forms of speech. It heavily is bent towards the modern pagan worldview that says the purpose of life is to avoid suffering. We don't have to deal with truth and natural law. We just go with whatever narrative is popular. If we say speech is harmful, we can ban it. If you want to identify as a pig who is, whatever, you can. All this sort of pagan worldview stuff, Twitter coddles that and encourages it. The Tolerance Boulevard is always a one-way street. We just have to square our minds around that. But there is some benefit in being able to see where people are at. Now, my personal stance is that, no, we are better off without it. And here is my argument. In the third epistle of John, verse 11, we're told to imitate that which is good, not that which is evil. Yes, we are wicked naturally. And the people who believe wicked stuff on Twitter, they were believing those things before. That is true. However, God created us as social creatures who interact with one another. If I have a ridiculous, absurd idea, and I go to my neighbor across the street and tell him something ridiculous, like, hey, I'm denying reality. I'm denying reality about who I am. I'm also denying reality about how the laws of creation work. I've made up some rules about how the weather works. That you'd get laughed. You'd get laughed and people would not take you seriously because it's not a serious thing. Well, now Twitter has broken that. It doesn't have the constraints of natural law. And we in the church, we should talk about natural order and natural law. In Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, the beginning there of Genesis, you have a creation account of natural law and natural order. One of the things that frustrates me is a lot of times in Bibles, when they put out the different passages and paragraphs, they'll call Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, they'll call that the first account of creation, and then they'll look at Adam and Eve and say that's the second account of creation. I think that's a really bad nomenclature, and it also has faulty assumptions. Genesis 1 and the first portion of Genesis 2 are the creation of natural order and natural law. The rest of Genesis 2 and Genesis 3, which looks really close at Adam and Eve, that is the creation of moral law. And this is pretty obviously so. In Genesis 1, you get the cycles of day and night. You get the birds of the air, the fish of the sea. You get biology. You get ecology. You get time. You get light. You get physics. You get mathematics. You get all of that stuff. You even get the family. The biology of Adam and Eve is described there, even though you don't get that up-close look. Genesis 1 and the first portion of Genesis 2, they're a bit like looking at the world through the window of an airplane. And then when you get close to Adam and Eve, it's like you're down on the ground with them. Their biology, the family structure, that is a part of natural law. You can't just deny that. The biology of Adam and Eve, and the meta level, that is a part of the natural order. Cause and effect relationships, they're part of the natural order. The fact that 2 + 2 = 4. If I go outside and I punch you in the face or you punch me in the face, somebody's been punched in the face. That's natural law. That's natural order. Well, the natural law says we are terrestrial creatures. We're not birds of the air. We're not fish of the sea. We're not heavenly hosts who can be in more than one place at one time. We can't snap our fingers and go from one side of the earth to the other. We can't talk to 5 million people easily and at a given moment. Well, Twitter breaks that natural law. It breaks the natural order of how we're designed. And chaos always ensues when you break the natural law. Just always. 100% of the time you break the natural law, chaos is coming. And we saw that when people tried to break this natural law in Genesis 11 with the Tower of Babel, that bad things happened. God has to step in and say, hey, you're not having these global conspiracies because they create evil. Evil always happens whenever fallen creatures come together and conspire. Well, Twitter is meant for that to be imitated and for it to be encouraged. So let's talk about the question of being better off. Let's flip the side on this. So we're definitely not worse off without Twitter. But what does it mean to be better off? And this is really where proper grammar actually becomes really important, because what we find in Dave Rubin's nomenclature is he doesn't say that we're good without Twitter. He says we're better off without Twitter. And I think that's the key reason why I really agree with the fact that we're better off. People will not instantaneously be good if they lose Twitter. If that snake loses its head, people are not going to instantly be good. Because Twitter is not actually the origin of evil. It's a medium. It's a tool. It's an avenue where people can behave in a way that they should not be encouraged to behave. It's a place where people can behave without having causes and effects immediately connected with one another. But that being said, with it gone, you still have the problem of how do you make people good. And of course, we know the answer to this. God alone makes the good. We're fallen creatures. We have to witness to people and have hearts and minds returned to God. One of the things that I've seen here in the last few weeks is the narrative around the coronavirus, which has largely been a narrative. A lot of the stuff that people have been sold have been lies, and they're now all confirmed to be lies. But if the church was as discerning as the church is called to be, the Holy Spirit comes to us so that we will be a discerning people. We should have known early on that the people who are fine killing babies are not honest when they tell you they're interested in your health. Period. Best case scenario, they're moral relativist when it comes to whose life is important and who's not. But if that's the case, they're still not in good faith. They're still not qualified to actually tell you that they care about your health. Period. You don't need to give them the benefit of the doubt that they're being honest with you on the front end. The abortion issue is a plumb line that tells you on the front end that all these people are liars. It is. Period. Period. There's no way to reconcile that. There's no way to reconcile we're fine killing 3,000 people a day, but suddenly we're worried about killing another amount of people. There's no math that makes that work. Whatever they're telling you, they're liars. They're trying to work a scam on you from some angle. We're fallen creatures, and there's already enough evidence to know that. And I know people might say that sounds so cheap. You can't just have that assumption so simply, but yeah, you can, actually. God has given us the tools of discernment, but yet we so often deny them. Well, without Twitter, without people's instantaneous impulse, people are still believing a lot of these crooked and corrupt things. But there's a little bit closer accountability. And people are a little less brave to do ridiculous stuff when there's an immediate punishment. I look throughout human history, and I've come to an interesting conclusion that stockades, the wooden planks that they would put and lock someone's head and maybe wrist in, I actually don't think they're as cruel as I once did. I don't want people to be condemned. As a Christian, as a pastor, I'm not permitted the desire that people be condemned on the day of judgment. I want people to be saved. The stockade, it's not capital punishment. It's not you being incarcerated for life. It's not you losing a limb. It's not you even incurring permanent damage like being whipped and having scars. It's something that you go into it for a period of time. You're in and out of the stocks for a few hours, but you were given a shameful consequence as a reward that you earned for a shameful act you did. You did something shameful, you earned that reward. And with those two things in close connection to one another, you're like, hey, if I do this shameful act, if I do this ridiculous deed, I'm going to get a shameful consequence immediately. I don't want that consequence, so I'm not going to do that. In our modern world, we are being ravaged by an abject lack of consequences. And not just with, say, the adolescent disruptive teenager either. We have a horrible lack of consequences between people who run our institutions, all of them, all of our institutions, including the church and including the institutions that are offshoots of the church, like our schools, our hospitals, our charities, and stuff like that. There is no accountability in anything. We have an invincible structure that doesn't have accountability. Politicians not held accountable. People that lie on TV, no accountability. You can get up there and tell people in 1 hour, we're counting all the cases of coronavirus where people died with it, and we're including that, whether that was their primary cause of death or not. And then tomorrow, because the politics have changed, well, we're only going to count people who died explicitly of coronavirus now, not just somebody who got hit with a car and they happen to test positive for it. Now we're drawing those distinctions today, but we weren't yesterday. You know, there's no accountability. And the stockade is actually a merciful way to issue accountability for that doesn't actually permanently damage people, but it gives them an opportunity to live their life in full after they repent and, you know, go about their life. By natural law, we need consequences for our actions. We don't with things like Twitter. But if we want people to be made good, then we need to have a place where we can actually debate. Twitter is not a place where there is open and free debate. If you don't believe in the spirit of the age paganism, the heathen gods of old, which are very much real, all the heathen gods are back, y'all. Moloch, what people did with Moloch, sacrificing their children to it, it's identical to what goes on with abortion. They make the same arguments, the exact same arguments, like my life will be better. I couldn't have these crops if I didn't kill my child. I couldn't have my career if I didn't kill my child. Like, it's literally the exact same arguments. It's the same arguments as human sacrifice. The whole idea of tribalism, like, oh, you're of that political party. It's like, of old, oh, you're from Sidon, where y'all have that idol. Okay, oh, that's how y'all do over there. This group of people can't be guilty of that sin. You know, they don't serve, you know, the fish demon Dagon. Therefore, they can't be guilty of that. You know, all the old idols, all the old heathen tribalism, it's all back. It's all back. It's just hell has gotten wiser this time and not put the totem pole in a really obvious place. You know, the reason why you saw all the coronavirus signs on the stores saying things like, do your part. That's all religious language because people are religious creatures. It's moral language. The reason why you even have the language of we believe the science rather than actually presenting the data is because it's a belief system. It's not a data set. It's a belief system. It's a religion. And Twitter itself is largely a religious temple. And I do understand why people would say it's actually good to have a temple for the demon worshippers so you know where they're at and you can watch what they're doing. I understand that. But at the same time, when we're honest about where we're at as a world, that is the head of the snake. And they're a tyrant. People like Jack Dorsey and Mark Zuckerberg, they think they're ruling the world. And largely they are. They have more power than our politicians do. Politicians bow before what happens on Twitter at an immense rate. People do things just to generate attention on there. And that's very bad. That snake, that tyrant needs to be crushed. In the same way that it was not good that people could conspire to seize heaven with the Tower of Babel, it's not good that people can conspire using the tools of Twitter. The idea that a mob can be whipped up on there really quickly is not a good thing. Yes, people do that. But if they were forced to leave their homes and go do that, then maybe some of them would not. They're still going to be evil. They're not going to be instantly saved. But we know when there are deterrents, when you make something harder to get, well, less people will persevere to get it. When you get everybody together, when Jesus is on the cross and you can get them whipped up, well, then they'll do a lot of evil. But if they're dispersed, they're more accountable to the natural law, then they're not going to do that. So just in summation of all this, while I've been playing Dark Souls badly, Twitter violates the natural law of how we communicate, of psychology, and therefore, yes, we would be better off without it. However, we would not be good without it because these people, they are believing this stuff regardless. But it would be more difficult for them to act on heathen beliefs if there's immediate consequences. That's basically my argument. Yes, you would still have terrible ideas. People would still believe wicked and evil things. However, don't make it where it's easier for evil in tyranny to do tyranny. And it's not even a question of freedom, because it's not freedom. If Twitter was a place of freedom where people could actually all speak freely, then that would be one thing. But it's not. It's a tyrant where certain ideas are promoted, certain modes of thinking that are instantaneous. You want to talk more about natural law. We're not made that we would sit around with a constant stream of information coming into our brain. That's not how we're naturally hardwired. That also breaks the natural law. That's not good. If this were just a public arena that was actually real freedom, where people could speak without the burden of some sort of inescapable tyranny, then yeah, I'd be for it. But right now you just have a vicious tyrant that's an unworthy head of the public sphere, and yeah, that needs to go. Doesn't mean people will be good if it's gone, but it does mean that the tyrant is tore down, and now you can settle things out more locally and through other means of communication. And you're a lot better off doing that as a society than you are with some large, massive, unaccountable tyrant that sits at the top of the Tower of Babel. Okay, so we'll wrap that up there. I hope this was meaningful. And reach out to me if you would like. I'm Pastor J. Dylan Proctor, and you can find me on Facebook, or you can email me at jeffdylanproctor@gmail.com. God love you, and have a blessed day.